Yesterday was the birthday of a musician that I have been wanting to profile since about a year ago. I started my Andre's Artist Profiles. And that's why I think he earned a very special tribute profile. And of course, that is Miles Dewey Davis, the second, better known as just plain Miles Davis. I probably have more Miles Davis than I do any other artist in my collection. As a matter of fact, I still haven't even scratched the surface of 26 albums. I have some classics, some highlights, and I'm missing both of each, but this is what I have. Because of the enormity of what I have by Miles, I'm going to just briefly cover the music on the album and, where it comes from. But I wanted to start out by saying one thing. I think it was George Wein in the Ken Burns special Jazz who said that a lot of artists had learned to be a pain in the butt because of Miles Davis. Miles Davis was a very complicated man, and he had a lot of inner demons and was not always known as being the most decent and easy to deal with human being around. A lot of people in the post-hip-hop era, especially those who are trying to embrace Miles's cool attitude, have really begun to embrace that ethic as well. And I just wanted to, let people know that, even though people like Miles Davis and Prince, both Geminis, I should add, may in fact have colorful personalities. But if you're a creative artist, it might be best to make sure, any of you out there who feel that way, that you choose your musical heroes more carefully when it comes to their personalities. Emulating Miles Davis as a musician would be very admirable, as I see him as a great success in that matter. But personally, I would pick somebody who was a little better off with people. Just my personal recommendation, because of what I've read about different people who have emulated Miles, and as George Wein said, become difficult because of their emulation of him. But, aside from Miles's flaws, he was a brilliant band leader, a great player, but pretty much every musical revolution in jazz from the 1950s to the 1990s had something to do with Miles Davis in some way, and he actually more or less created a whole subgenre of jazz, which is still going on and still as controversial as it was in its day, and we'll get to that a little bit later. This is the oldest Miles Davis album I have, Miles Davis and the Milt Jackson Quintet Sextet, recorded for Prestige in August 5th, 1953, at the Prestige Studios in Hackensack, Bob Weinstock. Miles Davis, Milt Jackson, Jackie McLean, who used to play with Charlie Parker and Percy Heath. Short, but sweet. Collector's Item, another album from the Prestige period. I guess this was during Miles's junkie years. He has some other great albums on Prestige that I don't personally have. The next album would be Round About Midnight, recorded in 1955, I believe, and his debut on Columbia Records. John Coltrane, Red Garland, Paul Chambers, Philly Joe Jones. His first great quintet on Columbia. The next album is Miles Davis, Miles Ahead, recorded with Miles's favorite orchestrator, Gil Evans. Miles hated that cover. Really, really hated that cover. He did not want white women on his albums just to sell, and I could admire him for that. This album is a really beautifully orchestrated record. One of my favorite songs on it is New Rumba. I really love the melody to that one. The next album would be Milestones, recorded with the same group that did Miles Ahead, Round About Midnight. This came out in 1958. Another one of Miles's classics. Here's another album with Gil Evans, Porgy and Bess. This album came out, I believe, also in 1958, 59. Really great version of George Gershwin's classic score. And of course, the album that I think pretty much everybody has of Miles Davis, if they have any at all, is Kind of Blue, with Julian Cannonball Adderley, Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb, Bill Evans, you know. You know, when I first heard this album, I didn't really like it very much. But as I get into it, you know, I realize that this album takes some time to get into, but when you do, it's very addictive. You know? So that represents Miles in the 50s. I will note, I do not have the album Birth of the Cool. No real reason, just don't have it yet. Seven Steps to Heaven. This album came out in 1962. This was his first recording with Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Tony Williams. This came out in 1960. I'm going to say 1962, I believe. But it's not his classic quintet. Victor Feldman and George Coleman are on this album. And this is where the quintet really came into being. ESP. Agitation is one of my favorite Miles Davis songs ever. Fantastic album. 1965. Miles Smiles from 1966 with a quintet. Again, one of my favorites. Sorcerer, recorded with the quintet, probably earlier on, 64, 65, but released in 67. There's Cicely Tyson on the cover. I love that photograph. This is one of the few Miles Davis albums of his day to feature a vocal, with Nothing Like You featuring Bob Doro, actually. This album was released in the mid-70s during Miles' retirement, hence the cover, but for the most part, it's music from around the Sorcerer era called Water Babies. Now, Nefertiti, from 1967, pretty much represents the last acoustic album by the Miles Davis quintet. This is the original Columbia Jazz Classics version with a wraparound. On Girls of Kilimanjaro, from 1968, Miles started to get funky and started to develop a sound that would inevitably become known as jazz fusion. That's his wife, at the time, Betty Mabry, on the cover. The next album, Miles in the Sky, is a similar affair, proto-fusion, and one of my favorite tracks in that respect is Stuff. George Benson also appears on the song Paraphernalia. Now this album just came out last year. It's a double album called Live in Europe, with a band including Chick Corea, Joe Zawinul, kind of a transition between In a Silent Way, which I actually don't have, I will say, and his next album, which I'm about to go into next. That covers his 60s work in my collection. Bitches Brew, 1970. The artist Claire Wine designed this cover. This was when Miles Davis officially developed the fusion sound. This album sold very well and got a very good critical reception for what it was. It's Miles on the back. Now, the first Miles Davis I ever heard was On the Corner. And I still must say, this 1972 album is nothing like any other music I've ever heard before. It's polyrhythmic, polyharmonic, it's danceable, it's a bit impenetrable in the sense of that abrasive kind of Ornette Coleman way of inventing melody, but to be quite honest, as far as avant-garde jazz funk fusion, this album takes the cake. It's really adventurous, and it's not off-putting. I personally recommend it. The critics didn't like this album. Miles didn't always like the critics either, so there. Okay. 70s Miles is woefully unrepresented in my collection. My father has a lot of his records from that era. I should probably change that. Miles had a lot of physical problems and drug issues that he had to deal with in the late 70s. He came back with Marcus Miller's era band in 1981 with The Man with the Horn. Hip-hoppers love Fat Time off this album, and indeed it is fantastic proto-hip-hop. One of my favorite songs on this album is actually Shout. It's got its, odd moments, but it's a really good album, actually. Now this album, Decoy, to me, somehow this reminds me of the time where Miles, in 1984, was starting to become a big star in Miami Vice, and again, embracing kind of a rock star ethic. This is a really, really great 80s funk fusion album. Really coherent. I just really love this album, to be honest. I've actually bought it twice. My first got cooked by a bad CD player. You're Under Arrest. Similar affair to Decoy, although by this time he's again reinterpreting pop standards like Cyndi Lauper's Time After Time. You know, like Robert Glasper, I can see Miles thinking, you know, how many times can we reinterpret, you know, say, My Funny Valentine, you know? Gets a little old after a while. I don't know if the critics like this too much because it was his last released album on Columbia at the time. Robert Irving III produced it, and Vince Wilburn, I think was his cousin, was involved in that one. Okay. This album was released in 1989, but was made in 1985, Aura. This was actually recorded in Copenhagen, and the compositions were not Miles's. They were that of the Danish flugelhornist Pelle Miltenborg, and they were basically all based on the colors of Miles's mystical aura. This again is kind of like you could say an On the Corner, a modal version of On the Corner for the 80s, and I really think this is one of Miles's finest work. Again, takes some time to get into, but that's Miles. The next album is Amandla, the follow-up to his 1986 album on Warner Brothers called Tutu. Again, I really like this album. Marcus Miller and George Duke helped out on production. This is Miles during that era. Miles died, I believe it was in 1991, but not before this album came out, Doo-Bop, where Miles collaborated with Easy Mo Bee for a fusion of jazz and hip-hop, which he never got a chance to fully explore before his death. Fantastic album, and I love the artwork as well. Now, I also have two Miles Davis box sets here. One is On the Corner box set, which has these raised figures on the front. You open it up and it has some great artwork inside it. A massive amount of liner notes. One of the things about On the Corner and numbered discs, there are 6 of them. I haven't even listened to all of this yet. It's so much music. Miles Davis did not really like to list personnel in a lot of his records, which became a sore spot with some of the musicians who played with him, and it actually had a lot more to do with the music speaking for itself than ripping anybody off, you know. I noticed a lot of rock critics like to use the word rip off and steal, as if music is a complete commodity and not a creative entity. Miles didn't seem to feel that way, but this is a great box set. You can find it. I actually lost one of the discs to this. Miles's tribute to Jack Johnson. I had the original CD. This has the album on it, but again it has outtakes. This was Miles influenced very much by Jimi Hendrix's follow-up to Bitches Brew. And that's what I have for Miles Davis. I know this was a gargantuan video, but I wanted to pay tribute to the artist. As flawed and difficult a person as he was, he created a body of musical influence that we'll be talking about, like we talk about Beethoven or Mozart today. I mean, like Louis Armstrong or Charlie Parker, this man is one of the most important musicians of the past 100 years, and I just wanted to pay tribute to him on what would have been his 88th birthday. So everyone out there, enjoy your music, be daring, and be good. I'll see you all next time.